Hi Oscar, this is Netværksgruppe 3, og we would like to present case 3. So here we go. I'll start explaining a little bit what GDP really is, the definition of GDP. Then I will take example of Denmark, USA, and Turkey, and then I'll go a little further and show you the increases and declines in GDP from, again, USA, Denmark, and Turkey from 2016, 17, and 18. After that, I'll go a little into this graph right here, which pretty much which pretty much shows the GDP from the last 30 years. Again, United States, Turkey, and Denmark. But I'll start explaining a little bit what GDP really is. Gross domestic product, or GDP, is the total market value of all finished goods and services produced within a country's borders in a specific time period. So if we, for example, take example in Denmark here, Denmark's GDP is 347,176. Turkey's with about twice as much as that, and USA are dominating with 21,439,453. So if we go over here, you can see all the increases and declines both USA and Denmark and Turkey have had in GDP growth rate from not really the last 3 years, but from 2016, 17, and 18. If we go to this graph right here, you can see this right here shows, I don't know if you can see it, I'll go a little closer maybe. I don't know why it shows 10,000, it's supposed to show 10 million right here, 20 million up here. And over here shows the year really start by 1990. So here you can see USA are clearly dominating again, and Turkey and Denmark are right at the bottom. GDP is really good right here to see which countries are helping or dominating in global producing of goods and services. So that's the kind of advantage of GDP, but some of the disadvantages is that you can't really compare countries because even though USA or America is producing a lot more than Turkey and Denmark, they are also consuming a lot more. So that's why GDP per capita will be sometimes is a better option, but yeah, Emmeli will explain that a lot better right now.
GDP per capita is the GDP then divided by the amount of citizens there are in a country, so the population of a country, and this gives you the GDP per capita. As you can see right here, the scale shows Denmark in green, and then the United States is blue, and then Turkey is red. So that shows that Denmark has the highest GDP per capita, the US right under it, and then Turkey has the lowest. The GDP per capita has something to do with the citizen's income per person, and therefore it shows that Turkey has a high amount of people, but each person has a very low average of income, whereas Denmark might not have as many people, but each citizen's average income is a lot higher than Turkey, with the US right under, but still not at the same spot as Denmark. This shows that Denmark is a very rich country and a very wealthy country compared to Turkey and compared to a lot of other countries.
GDP per capita, PPP, is gross domestic product converted into international dollars using purchasing power parity rates and divided by total population. This graph shows the three countries, Denmark, the United States, and Turkey. Denmark is the green, the US is the blue, and Turkey is the red. It shows that Denmark and the United States is very similar in comparison to Turkey.
So, Gini coefficient is used to measure the inequality in the distribution, often used with the income in a country. It's very efficient to compare the inequality between different countries. A low Gini means a low level of economic inequality, and a high Gini means a high level of economic inequality. So you can see on the graph, we are comparing Turkey, US, and Denmark. So the purple line is Turkey, and the green dots is US, and the blue line is Denmark. The graph shows that Denmark has a low Gini coefficient, which means that the economic inequality is low in Denmark. This is mainly because of our high tax rate, that we are able to create a good welfare system that really helps people with the economic difficulties and keep our Gini coefficient low. As you can see, Turkey and the US have a way higher Gini coefficient, which equals a higher level of inequality. The graph also shows that US and Turkey are really close to each other in terms of inequality. US don't have the same economic system as we have in Denmark, so their tax rate is way lower than ours. This could be one of the factors that results in a higher coefficient. They don't have the same welfare system, which doesn't give them the safety as we have in Denmark. So when you hit the poverty line, it's very hard to get out, nearly impossible, because there is not much help to receive from the state, and that results in inequality and therefore a higher Gini coefficient. It's much the same reason for Turkey, and as you can see on the graph, they are very similar to US.
Okay, so we are going to talk a little bit about household final consumption expenditure, which is the total consumption expenditure in a household, such as like car rent, food, clothing, etc. So basically the market value of all goods and services and durable products. So as seen in this graph, you can see Turkey as the blue, the United States as the red, and Denmark as the green graph. There is a big difference from like Turkey's graph to Denmark and the United States, and that's basically because Turkey has like a highly big free market, which is like non-governmentally driven, where the United States and Denmark is more a market economy, where like the prices are like determined by the supply and demand.
Daily or common use. Inflation measures the average price change in a basket of commodities and services over time. Inflation is indicative and decreases in the purchasing power of a unit of a country's currency, and it's measured in percentage. And you can see on the graph over here that the Turkey's inflation is much higher than the United States and Denmark's. And the Denmark's inflation was higher than the United States inflation in 1990. But then from 2013 and forth, the United States inflation has been higher than Denmark's.
As you can see here, it's a chart of the different interest rates and just in general rates in Denmark, the US, and Turkey. As you can see, the central bank percentage in Denmark is the lowest out of the three countries. Again, because Denmark is a very wealthy country. And the higher the GDP, the lower the interest rates. And then the opposite, the lower the GDP, the higher the rates. And so the deposit in Denmark is also a lot lower than the US and Turkey. And the housing is generally a lot lower in Denmark than the US and Turkey again. And this has to do with the country's welfare and the amount of money in their economic state, and then how they're doing for each citizen. Like I said before, for question 1, on the basis of table 1, try to explain why interest rates in Denmark compared to the 2 other countries are much lower. Again, it is because a high GDP will give you a low interest rate because the country already has a lot of money and therefore does not need more. And then, for example, Turkey, which does not have as much money, they need to earn more on the loans and earn more on whatever that they give out, so that they can, so that the money they give back is maybe double the amount. Whereas in Denmark, it's not as needed to put high interest rates because Denmark already has enough money for the welfare and has a working economic system.
Now we'll talk about how interest rates are determined. First, I'll just quickly explain what interest rate is. Interest rate is basically the cost of borrowing money. And the increase in demand for money and credit will raise the interest rates, and a decreased demand for money and credit will decrease interest rates. So basically, the demand for money and credit will determine what the interest rates are.
Okay, so as you can see in this graph, if the income is low, then the consumption rate is pretty high, and that's the red line right here. And that's because consumers with a low income spend a higher percentage of their income rather than saving it up. So people with a high income is more likely to save up some money rather than like spending them all. So if the income is middle, then the consumption rate is middle as well, and then the consumption and income are in balance.
And now part 4. What's the difference between GDP, GDP per capita, and GDP per capita PPP? GDP, which is gross domestic product, is the value of goods and services produced in a country. GDP per capita calculates the country's GDP and then divides it by the population. GDP will be higher when in a country with more inhabitants, as more people produce more. Adjusting for the population therefore makes it easier to compare GDP between countries of different size. GDP per capita PPP is the same as GDP per capita, but adjusted for purchasing power parity. PPP is the theoretical exchange rate that will allow you to buy the same amount of goods and services in every country. Adjusting for PPP attempts to convert GDP into a number that makes it easier to compare between countries. The most simple and known example of PPP is the Big Mac Index, which compares the price of Big Mac between countries.
So what are the formal requirements for drawing up graphs and tables, and why are they relevant? The main purpose with a graph is to see the economic development over time in a more manageable way. Seeing a bunch of numbers can often be confusing and not very informative. And also the other way around, seeing a graph might not be very informative, then it will be more ideal to put your information in tables. The requirements for drawing up graphs is to adapt the information that has been given. Other requirements are that you need a subject for the x-axis and one for the y-axis. The numbers that you use in your graph have to be accurate and up to date with the value of the graph. And at last, in what way does case 3 coincides with case 1 and 2? Case 3 coincides with case 1 and 2 because they all have something to do with consumer spending and use of money. So this was Netværksgruppe 3's version of case 3. Hope you enjoyed it, Oscar.